Mark Twain is famously quoted as saying, "Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. And inside of a dog, it's too dark to read." Anyway, this week I thought I'd do something a little different and give you a tour of my small but distinguished collection of my most prized possessions. That's my nautical book collection. This is by no means the biggest library around or the most complete nautical library, but I thought I'd do a little brief tour and sort of a tribute and a hat tip to those who came before and those from whom I've learned over the years. I tend to be what I would call a serial reader, meaning that I like to read a number of books on a single topic, very often one that references or recommends another. And one of the reasons I'm so attached to physical paper books is they give you the ability, if you collect them, to go back and reread them. Very often you'll stub your toe over a book that will remind you of one you read years before, and it's really nice to have that in your collection. I haven't really done a count, although I do have a spreadsheet database. I'm not very good about keeping it up to date, but I would say that scattered about in here, and maybe some that are no longer here that I've loaned out or that have gotten moldy and tossed out. Anyway, there's probably somewhere close to 1,000 titles in my collection total. And I do also have Kindle. I have two Kindles. I have the first generation, which was particularly good at free scanned books, Project Gutenberg being probably the biggest library for those. And then I have a newer Kindle on the boat, smaller size. That the thing about Kindle that I find somewhat limited is that if your topics of interest are not sort of current mainstream, or if they're very specific, like nautical, it comes up a little short on what you might find. Later this week there will be the twice per year Library Booster Club book sale, and always make a habit of going there and sort of scanning for topics of interest. Being a waterfront community, the nautical section can be sometimes good if the donations are good, and sometimes a little more sparse. But it's always worth checking out. And when the nautical section comes up short, well, we fall back on our second topic of enjoyment, which is history. So, welcome to the man cave / office and the library. I thought I'd go through and show you a little bit of the influences on my sailing learning. So, starting over here under the scenic view windows, these tend to be books that are more general topic, or that I am queuing up to read or haven't read yet. But I think probably half of this collection are books waiting to be read. The other half are books that don't particularly well fit any of the other sections that I'm going to show you. And then over here in the working portion of the office, under the drafting table, these are my naval architecture specific reference books, many of which have been with me since I graduated almost 40 years ago. And then the bulk of the collection in this L-shaped floor-to-ceiling bookcase that I built. This is where they're broken down. My reads are broken down into sort of sections based on topic. So up here I have a number of number of titles that are related to marine disaster or accidents on the ocean, coming down to a section where all of my very much out of date, probably useless cruising guides from when I was traveling to the Caribbean, and journals and logs from those trips, and more of a skills-based section, reference books. Lower sections here, and these are pretty densely packed. There's 2 rows in each of these. These are just general interest history books. Again, that's my sort of my second love is reading about history. Appropriately placed up at the top is the high latitude section, and a lot of the greats are represented here. Of course, Bill Tillman, one of my favorites, Peary, Amundsen. Of course, Tom Cunliffe's books are here. If you haven't familiarized yourself with Tom, he's a treasure. He's probably one of the greatest raconteurs that I know of, as well as just all-time great sailor. Really enjoy his video presentation and his books. Farley Moet, who wrote extensively about the Canadian North. Just a whole bunch here. Shackleton, of course, well represented. Pretty much everything he wrote or about him. David Lewis, tucked way up in the corner there, who's not only his Antarctic voyage is interesting, but his studies on primitive navigation, definitely worth checking out. And then coming down a shelf, we get into what I consider to be the section, 3 or 4 shelves here of the all-time greats. And if you want to go back to the very beginning, I don't think you can do much better than McMullen, Callahan, Claude Worth, Frank Bullen. This section is an entire series that I managed to score at one of the used book sales that covers all of the early cruising greats: Robinson, Voss, Harry Pigeon, Graham, Tams, Mulhauser, O'Brien, but basically McMullen, as I mentioned. These were all the earliest cruiser writers, and quite honestly, if you read the whole sequence from the very beginning of pleasure cruising, you really sort of gain an idea of how far we've come, but you also learn about the skills that allowed this. And then, of course, getting into the more well-known and mainstream, you've got Slocum. Some of you might notice that I've got multiple copies of Slocum. I've also got Victor Slocum's book about his father, Joshua Slocum by Ian Spencer. Again, sort of a serial read thing where you take a bunch of books on the same topic. The reason I have multiple copies of Sailing Alone Around the World by Slocum is it's one of the books that I consider the most important and that I love to give away. So when I do meet particularly younger beginning cruisers, I think it's a book that everybody should read once. J.C. Voss, definitely interesting stuff. Harry Pigeon's in there. Tinkerbell, which was the Robert Manry's book about the smallest boat to sail across the Atlantic at one point. Chichester, Ross, they're all here. Well, I've read them all at least once, and so many of them several times. Some of them you just keep coming back to. Certainly an honorable mention up here, Moitessier. I think Moitessier probably gets an all-time great as what I would call instinctive sailors. Moitessier understood that seamanship is a fabric that you have to work yourself into the weave of. It's not a science per se. It's not an art by itself, but it's really an understanding of the smallest fibers and then putting that together into a tapestry. So reading Moitessier's books in series from beginning to end is something that I completely recommend to anyone with an interest in, instinctive sailing. And then, of course, being in the boat building business, we've got the Rudder Treasury, which has an awful lot of really good information about early designs and designs that really came of their own in the early days of cruising, when people could just sort of find an open spot, bang together a boat, and go off sailing around the world. Frank Mattei, anyone who's involved in any kind of boat building, yacht design, naval architecture, wants to sort of see the root of our knowledge base, needs to be familiar with Mattei and Herreshoff. Certainly any of the Herreshoff books will give you a great perspective on the development of yachts and cruising capable boats. Well worth reading. Parties, Larry and Lynn Pardee are represented here. Certainly a great influence on me that you've heard me mention before is their philosophy of going simple and going early and young in life, not waiting until you can afford the ultimate complicated cruiser. There are so many different authors here that deserve a hat tip. It's just really hard to rule any out. Danny Green, who I've met in Bermuda, spent time talking to and really got to know and like. Yeah, there's just a lot here, and it's kind of fun going back and looking over just the titles and remembering. You never remember everything in a book, but if you've read the book and you've digested it, you will see the book, you'll see the title, and it'll bring something back. And again, this is why I like to collect physical books. They're here. I can come back and I can pick them up and read them again when something triggers me to remember what I enjoyed about the book. A lot of these are just sort of just accounts of cruises and people that were early involved in racing or cruising. There's just a lot here. Certainly, hat tip goes to Samuel Eliot Morison, who was both sailor and historian, and very enjoyable to read. And then, of course, what book collection would be complete without just your typical classics: Jules Verne, Robinson Crusoe. I mentioned Farley Mowat in the high latitude section, but if you've not read The Boat Who Wouldn't Float by Farley Mowat, you're really missing out. That's both enjoyable and sort of like a ocean-going Mark Twain. He was humorous, but reverent and yet irreverent. It's kind of hard to explain. You really have to experience Mowat. So philosophically speaking, I realize that electronic readers, here's Generation 1 Kindle, which needs its battery charged. Yeah, I get it. You can put hundreds, if not thousands, of books into a small portable device. This one's not even small. This is the original version. The one that's on the boat is much smaller than that. But here's the thing. Once you've printed a book physically on paper, it exists forever until it's destroyed or damaged. Electronic sources are wonderful in many ways, but the thing to remember is that probably the first great invention of man was the printing press, and that's why all of this exists. It was the first step to taking spoken folklore and knowledge that was passed on with great imperfection and turning it into a concrete, transferable form of knowledge that could be preserved indefinitely. So the printing press took ink, put it to paper, and preserved ideas in a very physical way. The electronic format and the internet, being another of man's great inventions, allowed a lot of information to be carried at our fingertips in a cell phone or a small device. The problem is that what you lose in that process is the physical printed matter that you can look at and touch. The same book that someone touched and handled 100 years ago is right here in your hand. The information that's on your Kindle is the information that someone has decided to preserve somewhere digitally, perhaps, or to put into a digital format. You really don't get to peek behind the curtain. You get what's there, and all I can say is that my experience with these Kindle readers has been that they are wonderful if your topics are mainstream. They're not so great if your topics are eclectic or sort of less mainstream. So my preference is still the printed book, and I think it always will be. But maybe that's a little bit Luddite. But the thing I can say is that once I have a book in my hand, that information is what the author wanted to convey. It's not edited. It's not changed. It's not altered to suit any sort of particular bias or set of acceptable and changing mores. So to me, the printed book is the ultimate way of transferring knowledge short of first-hand experience. And you, of course, going sailing with other sailors, that is the best way to learn. The next best way to learn, because there's a lot of time when you can't be doing that, is to obtain and treasure printed books by the people that came before and the people that sort of paved the way for cruising as we know it today. Sure, you can get out there and throw a Starlink dish on the back of your boat and cross oceans and access all the information that's on the internet, and that is a wonderful thing. There's so much advantage in that. It's hard to overstate. But if you're looking for a way to build your foundation, to build your seamanship knowledge base, rather than a way to get out there and, well, just sort of react and try and figure out how to fix things after they go awry. If you want to build your foundation, these are the bricks. This is the brick and mortar of a good, well-rounded and detailed understanding of seamanship. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Thanks for coming aboard this week, and well, not really coming aboard, but coming to the man cave, I guess, where I spend a lot of time just chewing on the bricks. We'll see you next week.